Bells, I have a question for you before today's episode starts. When you think of horror locations, what comes to mind? Haunted houses, a dark forest perhaps, maybe an abandoned building or the bottom of the ocean. How about fucking Walmart? Now, as a cognitive human being with the ability to count higher than 7, you might think to yourself, why would anyone want to set a horror story in a Walmart? That sounds fucking asinine. And you'd be correct in thinking that. However, frivolous things such as common sense or basic understanding of horror storytelling are foreign concepts to the genius minds over at r/nosleep. Frankly, I thought people would have gotten it through their heads that Walmart wasn't a good setting for their horror stories after Backstreet Boys tore into that dumb story about a dude with a foam head, but no. Anyway, today's story is titled, and prepare yourself for this one because the title's a real doozy, I delivered sodas to a strange Walmart neighborhood market. I know, right? Just rolls right off the fucking tongue. This story was posted on r/nosleep in 2019 and was shortly thereafter read by the narrator Mr. Creeps here on YouTube, which is how I first heard about this story. And like the vast majority of these no sleep pastas that the big narration channels frequently read, it is awful. It's trash. But unlike the majority of these tales, it appears even the saps that listen to these types of pastas hated it. Genuinely, of the nearly 950 comments on Mr. Creep's video, at least 900 of them are just people shit-talking the story. It's great, honestly. Hell, even some of the comments on the r/nosleep posts are talking shit about it. And you're not even supposed to give criticism on that subreddit. But that, of course, raises the question, how could this story become so universally panned when stories like giraffes are no longer my favorite animal get away mostly scot-free? Well, let's go over the story and see why the denizens of the Creepypasta YouTube community hate this as much as I do. Enough filler, let's get through this. So the story begins as you'd expect, with our protagonist, who actually has a name, Patrick, bitching and moaning about his job as a soda delivery guy. He elaborates by explaining how he always wanted to be a writer, and how he was semi-professional. He makes a pretty egregious spelling error while complaining about not being able to scare enough people with his prose and pay the bills. Based on the rest of this story, I can confidently say this author is projecting. Shots. Moving on, he complains about how he doesn't make money writing some more, and then we finally actually get to something resembling the plot. Oh no, wait. He just complains some more about how he essentially has a glorified stalking job. He continues to complain that while this job would be physically demanding, which is fucking hilarious by itself, it would be a defiant fuck you to his neighbors who talk shit about him writing shitty stories about Walmart to make money. He then says that he gets 3 to 4 days off work each week so he'd still be able to consistently write his stories, and adds that his job will help him with said stories. As he puts it, after all the time spent around fellow writers in academia, just joining the common Americans gave me fresh insight into the country's heartland. Are you starting to understand why everyone hates this story yet? Moving on, he then describes, at length, what his girlfriend is like as a person and what she looks like. I'm going to read that description to you, because a summary wouldn't do it justice. Nicole was 25, an extremely pretty and smart young black woman. She liked spending money, and she made the cash to live vicariously. Not to mention, she could outdrink everyone you knew. You with, like, the letter, not the word, because this author is a cunt. Armed with radiant eyes and wavy hair, Nicole had always captivated me. Her tall, slender frame was made all the more attractive by her quirky fashion sense. Okay, so first and foremost, spell you correctly, you lazy cuck. It's literally a 3-letter word. No fucking wonder you're only semi-professional. Secondly, want to guess how many times Nicole here is brought up after this point? Twice. Both of which are in the next fucking paragraph. Then she's fucking Thanos snapped out of existence for the rest of the fucking story. That paragraph, if you're curious, is spent describing himself. And I'm going to read this one to you as well, because it's similarly too good to be summarized. I was slender and had a crazy grin. Even though I was 27, I looked much younger, with straight brown hair stylized by my spiked bangs, boyish dimples, and bright green eyes. I was unconventionally handsome, to say the least. And when I didn't have my contacts in, I was forced to wear oversized glasses, more befitting an elderly rocket scientist than a millennial in his late 20s. So yeah, Nicole and I were a cute couple, and even doing manual labor I clearly wasn't made for, I stayed with the job. I wanted it for Nicole. Before I delve into this paragraph and all the awfulness within it, I'd like to point out that we are 8 paragraphs into this story. This story is 6 pages long, and this beginning bit is essentially just the main character crying about how he has to lift sodas and place them on a shelf, and describing himself and his unimportant girlfriend who never comes up again. 1/6 of this story is focused on literally fucking nothing but worthless exposition. Fuck you, author. Anyway, this is the cringiest thing I've ever read. From the look of the main character to how he's described, I feel like I'm reading someone's cringy Sonic self-insert fanfiction, not some fucking horror story. Fun fact, if you ever describe yourself as unconventionally handsome with a crazy grin and boyish dimples, just know that everyone who knows you wants to punch you in the face as hard as they can. Hey, did you like those last 2 pointless character descriptions that added nothing to the story? I hope so, because we got another one as Patrick describes his boss. He describes the dude, Ray, as a military vet who's worked with Pepsi for the last 20 years, which makes him, as Patrick puts it, in great physical shape, with a lot of loyalty to a job an illiterate 16-year-old could do. Which is incredibly funny because 1, you complain about how physically demanding this job is that young adults 10 years younger than you can do, and 2, that basically confirms you're basically a candy-ass bitch. He then describes Ray some more, and I think he's trying to make him out to be an asshole. But frankly, Patrick just comes off as a pretentious cunt, especially with this snarky-ass comment that oozes with inflated ego. Like a meticulous surgeon, Ray made sure that all those Pepsi products were precise and pristine. Only this wasn't brain surgery or any other job that requires rigorous focus. This was stocking shelves. Like, holy shit, shut the fuck up and do your job, you fucking piss baby. Speaking of Patrick being a piss baby, he then describes how Ray works him like a dog, and how after one shift, and I'm not even kidding, he complains that his legs were sore and that his body was dehydrated from all the heavy lifting. You are literally lifting boxes of soda onto a shelf inside an air-conditioned supermarket, and you get to go on break for fuck's sake. Like you're not working at a fucking construction site or paving roads in the middle of July. It's cans of soda. He then complains, for another fucking paragraph, about how Ray yells at him for not stacking boxes fast enough. Which is a revelation I'm not shocked to learn. You're telling me Borgenson here can't stock shelves fast? Inconceivable. And he says he dreaded going into work on his second day. Also, he explains that Ray has severe PTSD and can only cope with it by doing his job well. So you'd think Patrick would cut him some slack. You'd think that, but he doesn't. And finally, about a fourth of the way into this story, we actually get to the plot, at long fucking last. He clocks in at his bottling plant 30 minutes late, because of fucking course he does, then drives to a local Walmart neighborhood market. Which, I'm gonna be real, I didn't know these things were a thing until I actually started writing this script. They're basically small green Walmarts. It's pretty funny. Patrick doesn't think they're funny though. Mainly saying they maintain Walmart's stressful, suppressing atmosphere. Okay, dude. Oh, he also calls Ray an asshole for not driving him around. Like, dude, you're 27. Just drive yourself. Why is this guy such a dickhead? It gives me too much material to make fun of him, honestly. I'd comment on the next 2 paragraphs, but it's just Patrick being overdramatic about fucking nothing. So we're moving on. He walks up to the Walmart, but the front door won't automatically open for him. Uh-oh. He might need to exert himself to actually open the door. What a tragedy. He says the glass is so cold that it feels frozen, and then says cold air poured from his lips, which I don't think is the best way to describe that, but I don't care, so swiftly moving on. Turns out Ray is inside and opens the door for him. Patrick says Ray looks worried and flustered, something he's never seen before. But keep in mind, this is literally his second day on the job, so he barely even knows this dude, so this comment seems extremely out of place. They go inside and Patrick quotes that he doesn't see any Walmart wage slaves, Jesus Christ, around, and that the Walmart is surprisingly cold. Patrick asks where everyone is, and Ray basically tells his pissy baby ass to shut up and get to work. Then he fucks off to try to find someone. Frankly, I'd want to be as far away from Patrick too, so I don't blame him. Patrick gets to work, and by gets to work, I mean he complains about literally every aspect of his job for a paragraph. Swiftly continuing forward. He stalls so he doesn't have to do the bare minimum work, when suddenly he hears a loud crash coming from the back room. He shits himself, and starts to power walk around the seemingly abandoned Walmart trying to find Ray. Oh, he also calls people that work at Walmart slaves again. He finds no one, and he keeps hearing loud banging noises, so he's getting pretty freaked out. He thinks maybe the Walmart employees are playing a prank on him and Ray because seemingly everyone loves Ray? Strange leap in logic, but moving on. That's when he decides to nut up and check the back rooms, where he sees Ray for a moment, before the army vet and professional stacker disappears into the darkness of another room. Pissed off, Patrick follows him, asking if he needs any help. But he can't find him after taking a momentary glance around at the room, and decides he's probably off doing something, so he decides to just do what he was supposed to do in the first place. He finds a bunch of damaged Pepsi boxes that Ray had seemingly already taped up, and starts lifting and placing 12 packs of soda on a cart while complaining about how lumberjacks get paid much more than he does. No, that isn't a joke. He notes that the boxes seem heavier than usual, but shrugs it off as being weakened by the job at this point. Okay, and he carries on his way. He complains about how the intense labor is making him sweat, and that he struggles to lift a 24-pack of Pepsi. Man, those aren't even 20 pounds. Are you literally a skeleton? What the fuck is this, honestly? He eventually lifts the box, but drops it because he hears another loud thud noise in the distance. He looks and sees that it's a bunch of fallen over Pepsi boxes. He calls out Ray, but gets no response. So he goes back to pick up the pack of Pepsi he just dropped. Then we get the best line in the story. Just take a look at this. The large puddle was too much liquid to be coming out of just 24 cans. And in my sickened gut, I also realized I dropped a Pepsi instead of Mountain Dew Code Red. Yeah, so he opens the 24-pack and discovers, shock horror, instead of soda, he's been carrying around a box of 24 body parts, which he couldn't smell apparently. He recognizes that the body parts must have come from the Walmart slaves. Tasteful comment, bud. Then, all at once, the other Pepsi boxes start leaking vivid red fluid and glowing? No time to explain why they're glowing, though. We have to find Ray, because even Patrick knows he's too much of a beta simp to win any kind of conflict. Patrick runs outside behind the Walmart, screaming and calling out to the Uber Chad that is Ray, but gets no response. This meaningless search goes on for another 4 or 5 paragraphs that aren't interesting enough to explain, until he finds a 24-pack box of Diet Pepsi with Ray's decapitated head in it. And with that, the only even remotely likable part of the story is gone. Fuck you again, author. Hey, remember that bad creepypasta video I referenced at the beginning of the video? The one where a dude in a giant yellow smiley face mask murders a bunch of people in a Walmart? I hope you do, because if you haven't, the next line won't mean much, but fucking Smiley shows up and attacks Patrick. No, I'm not making this up. The antagonist of this creepypasta is a dude with a giant yellow smiley face mask with an oversized weapon that just murdered a bunch of people in a Walmart. Straight up, plain and simple, it is Smiley. And there's nothing anyone could do or say that can convince me otherwise. Of all the creepypasta characters to get a soft reboot on r/NoSleep, Smiley was nowhere near the top of my list. Yet here we are. So beta male Patrick holds up his boxcar to defend himself, but Smiley didn't spend 9 years in creepypasta limbo to be stabbed to death by literally the whingiest protagonist in the entire genre. So he literally backhands the box cutter out of Patrick's hands and pulls out his own custom-built machete box cutter. There's a joke. There's definitely a joke I could make here, but I choose not to. By the way, the author describes the box machete as the blade was longer than a Shakespearean dagger and sharper than one, judging by the lumpy flesh glued to it, which is just the most pretentious line ever written in human history. But also doesn't make any sense, because wouldn't a blade that's sharper cut more cleanly and not have... It doesn't matter, almost done. Patrick narrowly avoids a fatal swing from Smiley's machete, and now it's suddenly nighttime despite being morning earlier, because who fucking cares? Clearly not the fucking author. He looks around and knows no one is coming, so instead of fighting the killer, he decides to sprint off into a conveniently placed forest. Smiley chases after him, but apparently Patrick is suddenly Usain Bolt and manages to outrun him. He takes off his name tag as he's running away and says the job isn't worth $10 an hour. And that's the end. Was it as unsatisfactory to you as it was to me? I don't even really want to do a transition into the criticism section. Let's just talk about how god-awful this narrator is. Despite this being the 9th episode in a series about terrible creepypastas, I don't think I've ever truly covered the concept of self-insert characters. I briefly mentioned the idea in Burner, but never really delved into it because Burner as a character within the story was almost completely non-existent. Usually creepypasta self-insert characters are bullied teenagers that turn into serial killers along the lines of Jeff the Killer. However, that isn't the case in this story. Instead, we essentially have the author filling the space of the protagonist. And this isn't based on blind assumptions either. Going into the comment sections of the r/nosleep posts, the author refers to himself as a part-time author who's frustrated with working minimum wage jobs, and also defends the attitude of the character pretty passionately. He even calls blue-collar workers common folk and says they lack creativity in said comment section. Safe to assume the character in the story is essentially a one-for-one version of the author. And if that's the case, the author is a cunt and a bitch, because this is the worst protagonist I think I've encountered so far. He's not like the guy from Dating Game or Yu-Chan level, but holy fuck is he up there. He's just such a whiny bitch throughout, constantly pissing his pants and moaning about his job, as he himself declares an illiterate 16-year-old could do. This isn't helped by the fact Patrick is easily the weakest 27-year-old I've ever heard of. He describes lifting and stacking boxes of Pepsi as intense labor. Like, dude, the boxes you're lifting are like 12 pounds. They're literally light work. And it's not even that you're just complaining about it. He's also doing it while being a massive dickhead to his coworkers. He's constantly belittling Ray and the employees at the Walmart, calling them wage slaves or making fun of them for shock horror, being dedicated to their jobs. Frankly, his witty commentary is one of the worst parts of the story. It oozes with self-importance and makes the protagonist, and thus the author, look like a self-entitled prick who's so high up on his high horse that he'd die immediately if he fell off, which makes him immediately unlikable. To really put into perspective how much of this story is spent complaining, I went and copy-pasted the story into Google Docs and removed every bit that it was either complaining about work or talking about completely meaningless bullshit. The story in its entirety is 6 pages long. After editing it, it's 4 pages long. 1/3 of this story is just our main protagonist pissing and moaning about stacking shelves or talking about completely nothing. Most of his complaining is found within the first page as well. So to even get to the story, you have to slog through multiple paragraphs of fuck all. Which leads me to my second problem with this story. So going back to the Google Doc, I decided to restore the story to how it originally was, sadly, and tried to divide it into sections. This was actually pretty easy to do, and provided a good visual for this segment, where I explain how awful the pacing of this tale is. So for the first section, where Patrick here sets the scene, or rather pisses his pants about a minimum wage job for 20 minutes, is around 1.5 pages long, a little over 1/6 of the overall story. I already explained why the fact you have to trudge through a page and a half of nothing is a terrible way to start your story, but shockingly, the pacing gets significantly worse. The next section, the longest of the 3, is what I like to call poor man's build-up, because it's basically 3 solid pages of the author attempting to build an atmosphere, and failing pretty badly. The imagery and descriptions given throughout this section range from incredibly bland to laughably bad, and the mystery of where the other employees went isn't interesting enough to draw the reader in and make them interested in what's happening. To make matters worse, almost the entirety of this section is about Patrick being by himself, so it's filled with his pussy bitch commentary that makes this already slow section almost unbearable to get through, because not only are you bored, you're also annoyed. So yeah, besides Patrick stacking boxes and walking around an empty Walmart, nothing much happens in this section. So to recap, that is 4.5 pages of this 6-page story dedicated to some of the most tedious content ever written. By the time we get to the last section, the quote-unquote climax, the audience is either bored out of their minds or annoyed as fuck. Maybe a mix of both, actually. Which is why this anti-climax is so infuriating to read. Despite being a page and a half, the same length as the intro section, Its pacing is breakneck, and by the time it introduces Smiley, the story is basically over. The main antagonist avoids a swing from the killer, then does a runner. Similar to Abandoned by Disney, the ending felt like an afterthought, and by the time the author actually got to the point, he was rushing to finish, or was simply too bored to care. It feels incredibly lazy and leaves a bad taste in the mouth of an already thoroughly dissatisfied audience who just put up with the rest of this shitfest just to have the author fart in their face and run off. Speaking of unsatisfying things that make this story's pacing feel completely trash, you'd think instead of spending 4.5 pages complaining about lifting boxes or talking about your completely irrelevant girlfriend, you'd spend a bit more time building up the scary killer. Because in the story we're given, Smiley literally shows up out of nowhere with no hint to his existence until literally 4 sentences before he leaps out of the back of a truck. And the hint isn't even a hint. It's literally just showing Ray was murdered so he couldn't be the killer. It's almost like Ray was written to be a red herring, but the author forgot to add in the actual character revealed to be the murderer. Again, it just feels like the author stopped caring by the end and decided to wrap shit up and throw in a scary Smiley knockoff as an attempt at a climax. I'm done ranting now. Let's wrap up my thoughts on this story. It's awful, if you couldn't tell. This story isn't the worst story I've reviewed on this channel. The grammar and spelling, apart from a few noticeable errors, was passable, but holy shit, was this the most infuriating of the bunch. Most of that can be blamed on the protagonist, who, to quote Matt from Bad Creepypasta, is so cucking pussy that it actively takes away from the story. His constant complaining and mean-spirited nature makes this already dreadfully paced story infinitely more tedious and annoying. Along with the points mentioned above, the story itself is just not scary, not interesting, and not entertaining. It's a fucking slog to get through and isn't even a funny type of bad. It's just bad. I give it a 2.5. It's bland, boring, not scary, and annoying to no end. A nonsensical story with a truly dreadful protagonist, and an ending with a fun returning character who does nothing and is only in the story for half a page. Fuck this story. Anyway, thank you all for watching. This video took ages to make because I'm lazy and have a terrible schedule. But the next one is going to be shorter than this one and will definitely be out faster than this. Like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord in the link below if you feel so inclined. And if you want a story to be reviewed on the channel, I'd drop a suggestion down below if I was you, and I'll get around to it within the next 10 years. See you guys next time.